Hey guys, so today we'll be doing this problem right here that was submitted by Marie. And it says, if you have 19 grams of sodium, how many grams of oxygen gas are required for this reaction? And then after that, how many grams of sodium are produced if 22.7 grams of oxygen gas react? So let's do this first part right here. This is the equation for the combustion of sodium. So when sodium is in the presence of oxygen gas, it'll react to form Na2O. But first we have to balance this equation. So we see here that the sodium to oxygen ratio is a 2-to-1 ratio. So we want to maintain that, that balance. So right here, the only way that we could get it is from into a 2-to-1 ratio is if we take into account that this oxygen right here, there are two of them. So what number would we need here in order to get that 2-to-1 ratio? That number would be 4 because this simplifies down to 2-to-1. Okay, so since there are already two oxygen here, we need to make it so that there's 4 sodiums here. So we're going to put the 4 as a coefficient. And then when we're done with that, we need to make sure that this part is balanced as well. So when there's 4 sodiums, what coefficient needs to go here? That would be a 2. And then this 2 carries over here. So this 2 multiplied by the oxygen, that still yields 2 oxygen and 4 sodiums. So now we have 4 sodiums, 2 oxygens, 4 sodium, and 2 oxygens. Okay, so now we know that this equation is balanced. So now we can work with it. So given 19 grams of sodium, we need to convert that into moles. So to do that, we do 1 mole of sodium, and we have the molar mass right here, given to us by the periodic table. So 22.99 grams of sodium. So 1 mole of sodium equals 22.99 grams of sodium, or for every 1 mole of sodium, it'll weigh 22.99 grams. And then you do the math for that. So 19 divided by 22.99, and these units cancel, grams of sodium, and you're left with moles of sodium. So this comes out to be 0.826 moles of sodium, and then now we need to plug it into the molar ratio. So this, we now refer back to this balanced equation that we used earlier. So now we want to see for every mole of sodium, how many moles of oxygen are going to be used. So because we want to cancel out this moles of sodium and we want to end up with grams of oxygen, we're going to have moles of oxygen at the top here. So for every 4 moles of sodium used, 4 moles sodium, 1 mole of oxygen gas is used. So you divide 0.826 by 4, and this equals 0.207 moles of oxygen gas. Okay, good. And then it asks how many grams. So now we just bring it back down here. So let's copy this. So 0.207 moles of oxygen. Now we need to convert it from moles into grams. So 1 mole of oxygen gas. And the mass for a single oxygen atom, as we know from the periodic table, is 16 AMU, or 16 moles, grams per mole. But because this is oxygen gas, which is diatomic, you need 2 oxygen atoms. So 16 times 2 is 32. 32 grams of oxygen gas for every 1 mole of oxygen gas. So now we multiply 0.207 by 32, and we end up getting 6.61 grams of oxygen gas. Okay, so that's this first part of the question here. If you have 19 grams of sodium, how many grams of oxygen gas are required for this reaction? Now let's do the other side of it. How many grams of sodium are produced when 22.7 grams of oxygen react? So this is the language of this is a little tricky because sodium itself isn't actually produced. Sodium is yet another reactant. So in case this was mistyped and they meant sodium um, oxide, then we'll do both scenarios. So first, let's assume how many grams of sodium are necessary, not produced, when 22.7 grams of oxygen gas react. So let's see, 22.7 grams of oxygen gas react. So this will be the first scenario, and then Na2O produced when 22.7 grams of oxygen react. Okay, so same thing here, right? First we convert 22.7 grams of oxygen gas into moles, and we know that we have this conversion factor. So for every 1 mole of oxygen gas, it'll weigh 32 grams. And this equals 22.7 divided by 32, 0.709 moles of oxygen gas, okay? And then now we want to compare that to that molar ratio. So for every 1 mole of oxygen gas, referring back to this balanced equation, for every 1 mole of oxygen gas, we use 4 moles of sodium. So 4 moles of sodium. And this equals, so 0.709 times 4, 2.8375 moles of sodium. So the units here cancel out, units here cancel out, you're left with moles of sodium. So let's bring this guy down here. So 2.8375 moles of sodium. Now we want to convert that into grams. So for every 1 mole of sodium, right, it weighs 22.99 grams. So 2.8375 times 22.99 equals 65.23 grams of sodium. Okay. And then now let's do this last scenario because again, I'm not too sure if that was a typo in the question or not. So let's assume that we're trying to figure out how much Na2O is produced when this amount of oxygen reacts. So same thing, we convert oxygen into moles. So I'm just gonna copy this down because that's the exact same thing. Okay. So now we've converted this into moles. Now, instead of using the molar ratio between oxygen gas and sodium, we want to determine the molar ratio between oxygen gas and Na2O2. So we see here, this has a coefficient of 1, this has a coefficient of 2. So in this case, it's going to be for every 1 oxygen gas, or for every 1 diatomic oxygen molecule, you will yield 2 Na2Os. So 1 mole O2, 2 moles NaO2. Let's see what that equals. So 0.709 times 2 is 1.418 moles of I'm sorry, not NaO2, it's Na2O. Okay. Now we're going to bring this guy down here. We should know the drill by now, right? So think about what we would be doing first. So if we're trying to convert this into grams, what should go in the denominator? The moles, right? And then we want to know how many grams that would be. So to do that, right, we know that sodium equals 22.99 grams per mole, and oxygen, a single oxygen atom, is 16 grams per mole. So if we see that there's 2 sodiums and 1 oxygen, then we multiply the mass of 22.99 grams by 2 and add that to 1 times 16 grams. So 22.99 times 2 plus 16 equals 61.98 grams. So 1 mole of Na2O is worth 61.98 grams. So when we multiply that by 1.418, that equals 87.89 grams of Na2O. So again, based on the question, right, this is sodium is not produced. What is produced is Na2O. So I gave you guys both in case that was a typo. So I hope this helps. I'm also on Wisant, so if you thought this was helpful, please check out my page, and maybe I can tutor you in the future. Thank you.